Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the 10th through the 31st verses in the 9th chapter of Acts. This is immediately after his conversion story, which he himself retells in chapters 22 and 26. I did one on the 26th one, but all cases are Luke telling the story, but he's recording Paul recorded his story in court in chapters 22 and 26, but there's also a character we do not meet in the retellings, which is Ananias, minister of one who exerted a profound impact on one who exerted a profound impact on thousands, if not millions, throughout history. And this figure is known as Saul at this point. He becomes better known as Paul once he becomes the evangelist to the Gentiles, but his Hebrew name is Saul, and we read of him first in the first three chapters of Acts 8:1-3. He had consented to the martyrdom of Stephen, who preached in the temple and witnessed against the Sanhedrin there, and then he began to scatter. What persecution did is it functioned as a wind. So because of the presence of persecutions, the earliest followers of the way began to scatter from where the danger was in Jerusalem. And in the 8th chapter, we read that Philip successfully evangelizes Samaria, thus filling the second component in the the third component as outlined in the Great Commission as expressed in Acts 1:8, Jerusalem, Judah, Samaria, then the ends of the earth. So by this time it is more than a national movement, and so Paul seeks the authority of the high priest to persecute this sect, and he travels to Damascus. He cuts wind or rumor through the grapevine, or his intelligence sources tell them that some of them are going to be in Damascus, and he's determined to stamp it out before it spreads. So he heads there with agent supplied to him by the high priest, but runs into someone he doesn't expect. He went with the full intention of arresting Christians when he was arrested himself on the road by none other than the resurrected Savior, who asked, "Paul, why are you persecuting me?" And Paul asked, "Who art thou?" "I am Yahshua of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest." And the experience leads him blind for days. Now, the companions and the witnesses that he was traveling with, they could hear a voice but not see the blinding light. So at this moment in time, having just beheld the one he persecuted and whose resurrection he denied, he is temporarily punished with blindness, and his companions have escorted him to Damascus, and there is where we read of Ananias. And we're also going to read of the event, the preaching and the ministries which immediately occurred after the conversion story that we don't read of in the 22nd and the 26th chapter. So the 10th verse reads, "And there was at Damascus a certain disciple by name Ananias, and the master said to him in a vision, Ananias, and he said, Here am I, master." Ananias was a common name. He is not to be confused with the former high priest, whose son-in-law was the current high priest, nor the dishonest disciple who held back a proceed of the sale that he had given for his property to give to the new community, which was located on Barnabas's property. We're going to read of him. So they lied to the Ruach Kadesh, which invited instant death, but this Ananias was an altogether more positive possessor of the same name, and he's visited in a vision, which is a revelation which stimulates the sense of sight. So he beheld the resurrected form, the same one who had blinded Paul. He's appearing to Ananias, but because Ananias is already converted, he is a child of light and is therefore able to withstand the light. And he responds with, "Here I am." This is identical to what Samuel says when he is visited, and it's an appropriate and necessary response when we are summoned to say, "Here we are." And the master to him, "Arise and go into the street called Straight, and seek in the house of Judah for one called Saul of Tarsus, for look, he is praying." Saul of Tarsus was known by reputation to Ananias, who dwelt in Damascus. He didn't know he was coming, but now that he was there, he has question and concern for why he would to seek him out when he had made every expression of every intention expressed. Every expression was an intention to inflict harm and injury on the followers of the way. And so he poses these questions to the master, the son, who calls him, as we read, "And has seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming and laying his hands on him, so as to see again." So he's telling him he's blinded in a house, unable to see, but he has a vision. In spite of being blind, he has a mental vision of a man by name Ananias, that was him, coming in and curing his blindness by placing his hands over his eyes and performing the miracle of healing. And Ananias answered, "Master, I have heard from many about this man, how many evils he did to your saints in Jerusalem." So he had consented to the stoning of Stephen, who is the first post-Messiah martyr for the faith, and he had caused many Jews to scatter. He was a troubling presence in the quarters which the Christians congregated, and this was known by reputation all the way in Damascus, which was a city to the north, and which corresponds with the modern country of Syria in relation to Israel. And here he has authority from the high priest to bind all those calling on your name. So he knew why he was there, why he set off, why he embarked on the course, was to arrest people like him for professing a religion he didn't agree with. He thought it was heretical, he thought it was evil, he thought it was against everything that he had been conditioned and molded by the traditions of his ancestors. But Yahshua assures him, "But the master said to him, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before nations, kings, and the children of Israel." So he is chosen, the least likely of characters. He often chooses the ones the entire world would give up on. He elevates to his chosen vessels, and this was not just any chosen vessel, but in fact the Messiah himself, the single greatest Christian who ever lived, and he was his evangelist to the Gentiles. That's how nations is usually translated. They're kings and the children of Israel, and there was an equality between the welcoming. He was the one who tore down the bridge of the Gentiles who were formerly strangers and aliens from Elohim, by elevating them to an equality. The same path by faith and repentance of the Jew makes them co-heir in the same salvation, and the conversion of the welcoming and inclusion and invitation of Gentiles should have converted many Jews to accept the new and wonderful way of the good news. "For I shall show him how much he has to suffer for his name." In this he was not bluffing. Paul had temporarily inflicted much persecution, even death and fear and scattering and threats for people's safeties, but the fact is that he would bear far more than he ever inflicted on others while proclaiming these names. He lists and documents the physical tortures he endured in places such as 2 Corinthians 6, 3, and 11, and 2 Corinthians, the second half of the 11th chapter of the same book. He received 39 lashes 5 times. He was stoned to death on one occasion. He His life was in constant danger almost from the beginning, as we progress further on this chapter. And Ananias went away and went into the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, Brother Saul, the master Yahshua, who appeared to you on the way as you came, has sent me, so that you might see again and be filled with the Ruach Kadesh. Paul was already privy. He had a premonition from the vision he had received that a man named Ananias would come and restore his sight. This is the man he's been waiting for, the man he's expecting, and he addresses him as Brother Saul, even though had they not been mutually visited by the same divine being, they would not have been brothers, they would have been enemies, and he would not be ministering to him, and Paul would not be seeking or accepting favor from him. But he was sent for a purpose, and that's what he came to do. He was obedient to the vision, as Paul himself says in defense of this encounter in Acts 26. And immediately there fell from his eyes, as it were, scales, and he received his sight, and rising up, he was baptized. So almost instantly after being unblinded, illuminated, having his sight restored, so his eyes, whatever was closing them, fell like scales. They evaporated. He could see. He was now privy to the light, and he was going to walk in the spiritual light now that he had the physical sight to behold life. And so almost instantly he was baptized. This was the rite of initiation for the church since its inception, and the Master himself was baptized even though he didn't need any sin. John the Baptist protested at the mere suggestion that he baptized him because John the Baptist was a sinner, unlike this man, but he did it to set our example, and Paul was certainly a sinner by this point, but the transformative power of Elohim is such that it can transform the most reviling anti-Christian monsters into the most effective evangelist of Christianity. And having received food, he was strengthened. And Saul was with the disciples at Damascus some days. So for some period of time, he had just received his sight. He was physically nourished. He was strengthened. He was attending to his needs. He was stationary in location for a period of days. That location was Damascus, but not for long is he going to remain stationary. He's going to get busy with what he was called and chosen for almost immediately. And immediately he proclaimed Messiah in the synagogues, that he is the Son of Yahweh. So he was immediately prompted. He was aware of his calling. He was aware of what he had been chosen to do and why wait with it. He was instantly prompted. He had a life-altering, transformative experience. So he initially goes to the synagogues, even though he's called to the Gentiles and the kings, he's also called to the Jews. And this is where the earliest Christians would have met, in the temples and the synagogues, until they were expelled around the year 50 A.D., and it was Paul more than anyone else who contributed to their expulsion, because what he did is he brought Gentiles into their sacred places, and this offended the Jews, who henceforth expelled the Christians permanently. But he preached that he is the Son of Yahweh. This is the only occasion in the book of Acts where we read this phrase, but 15 times in the 13 epistles of Paul we do read this phrase, this designation of Yahshua as the Son of Yahweh. And all who heard were amazed and said, "Is this not he who destroyed those calling on this name in Jerusalem, and has come here for this, to take them bound to the chief priest?" So as far as they knew, his entire reason for being there was to arrest these people who had proclaimed the name he himself had just boldly proclaimed and declared the deity and divine sonship of, and they were shocked, and stunned because, as far as they knew, he was there for something altogether different than what they had just witnessed. They had just witnessed a bold and impassioned apologetic of a force he was the reputation of the principal persecutor of. But Paul kept increasing in strength and was confounding the Jews who dwelt in Damascus, proving that this is the Messiah. So the Jews in this particular synagogue, they had different interpretations which wouldn't allow them to accept Yahshua as the Messiah, and the reason they didn't believe in Yahshua is because they did not want to believe in Yahshua. They had all the evidence in the Old Testament scriptures correctly interpreted that he was the one whom the prophecies point to, and Paul would have been skilled with the Old Testament, but he had instant illumination, which made sense of what were once stumbling blocks to him. So as a Jew, he was familiar, a Pharisee of the strictest sect, he would have been familiar with Genesis to 2 Chronicles, which was as how the Hebrew canonical was originally arranged in order. And he now had a new insight and interpretation that the Messiah is the one who are proclaimed in various places by many prophets. And after many days had elapsed, the Jews plotted to kill him. So almost immediately he has people murderously motivated to him. They're not content to let him live. He's such a troublemaker. They think it's better off just to get rid of him than to allow him to stir up commotion and contention in their synagogues and in their city, because his passionate preaching elicited riots, we read in some places. But their plot became known to Saul, and they were closely watching the gates day and night to kill him. So they were determined to kill him, and they had the entire city on watch. They had their guards and their professional policemen and soldiers at the beck and call, armed, ready to drag him up and kill him. But Paul was privy to their conspiracy, and he acts on that knowledge. But taking him by night, the disciples let him down through the wall, lowering him in the basket. So with the help of trusted disciples who he shared the knowledge of the plot from, probably was received the knowledge of the plot from, they arranged for him to be lowered from the city walls outside of the danger that exists within the city through a basket in the darkness of night. And that's how he escapes the thing of Damascus. Now, between the 25th and the 26th verse is a chronological gap of some 3 years. We read that Paul in Galatians 1:16, I believe, he spends 3 years in Arabia seeking personal revelation. This was a man who had been introduced to the Christian faith, not by any human witnesses, but the embodiment and the founder of that faith himself in resurrected form. So for a variety of reasons, he did not want to immediately present himself to the recognized apostles, but to seek out revelation from the source of the revelation, and this would prepare him to have an equal testimony, a more sincere and convincing testimony that he was, and he did in fact encounter a dramatic conversion experience, but its sheer unbelievability is not going to be immediately accepted. And as we read, it's a struggle to gain acceptance amongst the nucleus of the faith. And having arrived at Jerusalem, Saul tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a Talmud. Now, the Greek tried indicates a continuity. That means he kept trying. It was more than once. It is a plural form of tried, so it wasn't just once that he tried to invite himself in or make his way through their inner circle, but they would not let him because fear was the electrical fence. This man had wanted them dead. He sought out to persecute them and drag them in chains and ultimately kill them. So they had every right and reason to be afraid. And based on his past behavior, they had no idea that he had been visited by the Messiah they knew in the flesh in resurrected form. So as far as they knew, he was not a disciple. He was pretending to be a disciple in order to gain their trust and betray them from the inside as opposed to the outside. They thought he was conceiving a stratagem. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and told them how he had seen the Master on the way and that he had spoken to him and how he was speaking boldly at Damascus in the name of Yahshua. Barnabas is a character we first meet of in chapter 4, verse 35-36. He was a Levite by background, and his name, I think his real name was Joseph, but his nickname was Barnabas, which means an encouragement. And here we witness him living up to his name. He's encouraging the apostles to accept the unlikeliest candidates into their fold. He's assuring them that he had been visited by the Savior while en route to do what they were all afraid of him to do. In the midst of traveling to be arrested, he himself was arrested and converted, and almost immediately he had spoken, not only he had spoke boldly with confidence and certainty and surety of an authentic believer at Damascus in the name of Yahshua Messiah. So that name meant something to him now. He treated it as something more significant than that which belonged to the man he originally supposed was a false Messiah. And he was with them at Jerusalem, coming in and going out, and speaking boldly in the name of the Master Yahshua, and disputed with the Greeks, but they undertook to kill him. So already he's making enemies among the Greek-speaking Jews. The Hellenistic culture had tremendously influenced the Jewish people, and the Greek imperialists were not too dissimilar from the French in that they sought to conquer and impose their culture on those they conquered. And this actually happened when Rome conquered them. I think Pliny the Younger said Greece has conquered her rude conqueror. So they had a way of imposing their culture on the people, and there was also the Septuagint, which would have been the more commonly read form of the Old Testament. It was translated in Greek, so there were Greek-speaking Jews. They were in Jerusalem, and they wanted to kill him because they were threatened by what he had to say. And when the brothers learned of this, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him out to Tarsus. Tarsus was his hometown. It was in the Roman province of Asia Minor, which corresponds to the modern country of Turkey, and Caesarea was a city which was elevated by Herod, who remained an ally, who owed his position to Caesar and was pliable to his demands. He kept his Jews in line, and he placated Caesar by putting eagles in the temple and all sorts of things like that. Then indeed the assemblies throughout all Judah and Galilee and Samaria had peace and were built up, and walking in the reverence of Yahweh and in the encouragement of the Ruach Kadesh, they were being increased. So this represents a rare moment of time, a golden day of sorts, when Paul had stopped persecuting them, so there was nothing but growth, and the growth they had spread from the nucleus of Judah to Galilee. That was the northern region in the Roman arrangement of the territory of Palestine. It was Galilee, in the middle was Samaria, down below is Judah. So all of the promised land, which was once the United Kingdom of Israel, the faith was founded and flourishing in this territory. And that was all possible by the expansion, and the evangelism was made all possible through the power of the Ruach Kadesh, that is the Spirit, with whom we have been blessed to have in every age since, and we too can perform feats just like the apostles did, because the secret is not in our natural resources, it's in the one who dwells in us, and he's never more than a prayer away. So we are never with excuse for not having his presence when we need him most. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.